home and the relatives back home. Sometimes they were living with a grandparent or an aunt and uncle while their parents came to the United States to earn enough money to bring them back. And that's the only home they've known. And they are ripped from that and brought to the United States. For a better life, yes, but still what they're leaving is what they consider to be home. The communications challenges that they face when they get here, some of it is language, but I think one of the myths out there is as soon as they learn language, as soon as the child learns language, he just needs a little bit of English, and then he can sit next to another child in class and they'll be on par with each other. There's so much more to communications than just the language. There's a style of communicating, and interestingly, it's different even in different parts of the United States. You'll see someone from the Midwest communicating differently than someone from the East Coast. So you can imagine the different communication styles that come to play here. The economic concerns, as I mentioned, many of them come here and to make a better life, but they start with some economic issues, some struggles, particularly in this economy. Some of them who have good skills need to go back to school here in the United States as parents themselves. And the other big issue is this is a new way of life for so many of these families. They might have been rural and they're moved to an urban environment or vice versa. And the issue of climate being very different than the climate they grew up in. For example, there was a Somali parent who's now living in Boston, and someone said to him on a very cold day, well, I bet this weather is troublesome for you. And he looked at the person and said, I haven't been warm since I got here. So here's a father who every single day is dealing with the difference in climate from the community where he grew up and the community that he's now taken his family for a better life. So let's look at this immigrant and refugee experience. Something I see in schools is that people generally don't think there's a difference between the two. We tend to lump them all together as immigrants. And actually, they have common experiences, but there are also some distinctions that are very important to understand if you, for example, have a refugee center. The refugee experience is generally that these families are ripped from war and violence. The students themselves, they have experienced unthinkable things. They may have seen their parents killed in front of them. They are, again, ripped out of these countries. Sometimes they are sent to refugee camps. Sometimes there are multiple refugee camps with health issues. They may have their education interrupted for a while. Then very often refugees are uprooted quickly. So, for example, there is a refugee center in Chicago that is waiting right now for some Iraqi students. So things happen overnight. They've experienced some very difficult things, but they do have legal supports once they get into the United States, and they do have the support of these refugee centers. The immigrant experience is similar in some ways, but more often you see these split families where a member of the family, it could be an older brother, it could be a parent, comes to the United States first to earn money and then sends it back home to try to bring the rest of the family here. You also frequently have documentation issues. It is very, very difficult to get documentation to immigrate to the United States from many countries right now. So they have different issues that they are facing. But something that is really constant between the two of them is that there's trauma is a part of their life. They've had difficult journeys getting here to the United States, whether they've had the appropriate documentation or not. It's a difficult trip. They're all dealing with separation and grief. As we mentioned, they may be reuniting families that were never a family. A child was raised by grandparents, and we see this a lot with adolescents who come. Suddenly, they're part of a family that they didn't know. Who are these adults that are now saying they're the parents of the family? They may have extended family members that settle in different parts of the United States. So these strong communities, these strong family groups that they had before are suddenly separated by hundreds of miles, making it very, very difficult to connect with each other. Also, violence, as I mentioned, is a part of both experiences quite often. The immigration trip can include violence. They may be living in parts of town where violence is part of their everyday life. They're dealing with current stress, and they're also dealing with post-traumatic stress syndrome. And this often affects the entire family. So if you pull out just the student and try to deal with the student's issues, and you're not dealing with the issues of the whole family, you're really only going to have a limited amount of success. In one of my classes that I did for immigrant parent leaders, I actually for 3 years worked with parents from all over the world and helping them become leaders in the school. And one year I had 2 sets of Vietnamese parents, and we would always talk about what their background is when they how did they come to the United States. And in one case, the family had come, they were part of the boat people. They were at sea for days. She was there with her very large extended family. Several of her sister-in-laws were pregnant. She said some ships would pass by and throw them some clean water that they could drink. Finally, a ship picked them up, and they came to the United States, and they all settled in the same area. They're struggling, but economically, but they have this support system. The other Vietnamese parent, another mother, had actually been adopted by an American family, and so her trip to the United States was relatively comfortable, and she has had economically a relatively comfortable life here, but she's the only child in this family, and she's the one who came to me after the class and said it's very interesting for her to see the different experiences, and she said, we all are dealing with some sort of trauma. She said in the other case, her trip here was very traumatic, but now that she's here, she has a very large extended family. She said, in my case, I don't have any family here, and so for me, this is the trauma that continues in my life. So I think it's important to make sure that you are looking beyond the surface. Again, if a parent seems like they're very comfortable, they have a good English skills, there may be so much more that's going on in these immigrant and refugee families. So what kind of mental health issues are we really talking about here? And why are they not being identified? And a part of this population really is dealing with these issues and without a whole lot of treatment. Part of it is that this behavior is seen through the Americanized lens. So let's go back to our thinking about the 2 students we talked about before. In the first case, you've got a child who just looks like she doesn't care. Family doesn't care. She's not interested. What are you going to do? You've tried to motivate her any way you can. But if you think of it in terms of the experiences this child has had and the continuing experiences the family is having, you may have a child there who is suffering from depression. As a matter of fact, she may be part of an entire family that is suffering from depression. And so it's not that they don't care, it's just that they are dealing with a serious issue. In the other case, in Juan's case, perhaps that child has lived through some real violence in the country that he came from, and he's witnessed some things that are way beyond his comprehension to deal with. So he has this heightened fight or flight instinct, and he's dealing with post-traumatic stress syndrome. So what looks like just a child without socialization is a child who's really struggling with some serious issues.